Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate you all attending this. This issue of resource adequacy or the Texas energy shortage is a major issue in Texas that's being discussed at the Public Utility Commission as we speak and has been discussed for the last year or so. This white paper is a little bit different bent on that shortage situation. So I've got a lot of information to cover here, so let me get right into that. First, I want to talk a little bit about, just real briefly, about the ERCOT system. The ERCOT system is approximately 85% of Texas, the area shown in this slide in dark blue. The left map shows the transmission system, and we won't talk a lot about that at this point, but we will in a minute. But you notice that in the transmission system that the major routes appear to be west to east, that is from near the New Mexico border to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then north to south, both from Dallas-Fort Worth to the Houston area and Dallas-Fort Worth to the San Antonio-Austin area. The major load centers here are Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Corpus Christi. Some of the facts and figures here about ERCOT. It's a big system, about 200,000 square miles, and you can see the numbers here. A couple of key numbers to remember is that peak capacity of generation is about 73,000 megawatts or 73 gigawatts. And the all-time peak load last summer, the summer of 2011, that is, was 68 gigawatts, or just over 68,000 megawatts. Keep these two numbers, 68 gigawatts and 73 gigawatts, in mind as we talk through this this presentation. Currently, ERCOT has about 10,500 megawatts of wind generation capacity. Most of that, all but about 1,500 megawatts or so, is in West Texas. The rest is relatively newly developed along the Gulf Coast of the Gulf of Mexico coast down in South Texas. The reserve margin, that is the targeted reserve margin, is 13.75%. This is consistent with what the reserve margins are in many independent system operator areas, in other words, in other parts of the country. However, in 2011, the reserve margin was only 7.6%. ERCOT is an island, essentially. It has minimal connection to the rest of the U.S. electric grid, and the system itself is about the size of the United Kingdom. In terms of capacity and energy, the left chart being, or the left circle being capacity and the right circle being energy, and this is 2011. 2012 will change slightly, but not a lot. Most of the capacity is natural gas, and yet natural gas and coal are pretty much tied for the production of energy, that is for the megawatt hours. And you notice that wind is 9% of energy, but it's much greater, 13% of capacity. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that wind issue in a little bit. Hydro, biomass, other, that includes solar power, is under 1% of the system. The average load growth in ERCOT is pretty significant. Between 2013 and 2022, the Energy Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, estimates that we will have a 2% or 1,400 megawatt per year load growth. You can see what that means in terms of power plants that we'll need to meet that load growth. The reason that we're experiencing this load growth in Texas is because we have a good economy, we have significant population growth, and because of the summers here, we have significant air conditioning demand. This is a chart that was produced by ERCOT in May 2012. They produce these reserve margin reports twice a year, usually in May and in December. This is the most recent one showing that reserve margins dropped below the target as early as 2014. Actually, the newest report that will come out, or the next report that will come out in December, probably will show that this is not quite as dire as it looks here. 2014 will likely be closer to the target, although not at the target, but 2015 will continue to be a problem. This target reserve margin is intended to ensure reliability during loss of generation or loss of transmission events, and it's typical for most major electric systems in the U.S. So you can see that the reserve margins look pretty bleak out a ways, and these include projected plants that have been given air permits if they are fossil burning plants and have been granted interconnection agreements with ERCOT. So they are plants that are in the pipeline, if you will. So this rapidly shrinking projected reserve margin, along with the reliability challenges experienced in 2011, that is with the hot summer we had in 2011 and some rolling blackouts that occurred in the late winter and February of 2011, have led the Public Utility Commission to begin discussions, and these discussions began about a year ago, about resource adequacy and how to incent developers to build new power plants in this market, because that's what the reserve margins show, is that there is not sufficient new generation in the pipeline to meet the projected load. So why is there this potential shortage? And why won't developers build in this market? Well, first of all, low natural gas prices have reduced the financial viability for new resources. This is a gas generation or gas-driven market, and that the power prices are determined largely by the efficiency of the generation equipment and the price of natural gas. And with low natural gas prices, low natural gas prices result in low power prices, which result in insufficient financial returns for new projects. And so now, if you look at the secondary market for generation in Texas, that is generating equipment that is sold, or power plants that are sold after being built, not new power plants, the price for these plants typically in the last several months has been about $500 to $600 a kW. That the actual units aren't that important. A new plant, however, costs somewhere in the order of $1,100 a kW. So new generation is about twice as expensive as existing generation, which again emphasizes the problem. And why is this? Why haven't power prices gone up? Why aren't generators incented? Another reason is that power prices have been arbitrarily capped. The design of this market beginning in 2001 was that it would be an energy-only market, which would allow power prices to rise to whatever level they needed to rise to clear the market. Early on, power prices rose to as much as $10,000 a megawatt hour, and that was politically unacceptable, and so regulators put caps on these power prices. The early caps were somewhere in the order of $500 a megawatt hour. They've currently been allowed, or today they've been allowed to rise to as much as $4,500 a megawatt hour, but still not sufficient to incent new generation, although there have been some recent plants in the pipeline that have begun construction. And finally, the demand growth in Texas is robust, probably twice what it is in just about any other area of the country, and so that really creates an additional need for new capacity. So what are we doing about this? What's going on to try to solve this situation? Well, the Public Utility Commission, again, has been holding hearings for the last year or so, and finally, and has done some things on a short-term basis to try to resolve some of the shorter-term issues. But to try to address the long-term issue, the Public Utility Commission hired the Brattle Group, a consulting group, to conduct a study and provide recommendations. And these 5 options that you see on the screen are the summary of the options that the Brattle Group brought forward. And they vary from the very first one, energy-only market, which is what we have today, down to the last, which is a resource adequacy or centralized forward capacity market, which is what is typically referred to as a capacity market or a full capacity market, similar to what is in the Northeast, the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland Interconnect, or PJM, and some of the other New England ISO, New York ISO, and ISO New England. And so that's a wide range, and then there are various shades of that on the options in between. So these are the options that were brought forward by the Brattle Group, and the options that now the Public Utility Commission is seeking comments on and talking about almost on a weekly basis. And so where do we go from here? Well, the PUC is going to continue to conduct workshops. They're going to deliberate. They're going to have rulemakings. They'll make some small changes. I don't think there is a real issue until 2014 or 2015, as long as they can bring mothballed units back into service, which they did the last 2 summers, and if we don't have unusually hot summers like we had in 2011. So I believe that the issue is at least a couple of years out. The 2013 Texas legislature may address this resource adequacy issue. My feeling is that probably they will not, because it is not currently a burning platform, but they could. The legislature in Texas meets every other year in odd years from January through May, so they have not had a chance to weigh in on this issue as a legislature yet. Some of the legislative committees have expressed concern, but nonetheless, they could address the issue. My feeling is that based on the milder summer we had this year, 2012, and the relatively low power prices that their constituents are experiencing, that the legislature may not address this issue this time. But there seems to me that, well, and the last thing, of course, is I believe that because of the interference in the energy-only market by regulators and the lack of the ability for the market to operate as it's designed, I believe that we're going to have some sort of capacity market in ERCOT eventually. Will that occur in the next year? I doubt it. Will it occur in the next 2 or 3 years? Well, possibly. It could take a while to implement even once the decision is made, but I believe we are quite a ways away from the decision. Well, where could we go from here? Well, we could go here. Texas has a lot of solar capability, and we'll talk about that in detail, but you can see from these two maps that Texas is sort of on the eastern edge of the Sun Belt, if you will, and the western edge of Texas has got great solar capability. So while solar energy may not represent a complete solution to the problem in ERCOT, it could certainly help, and in a big way. Texas is one of the leading states in solar intensity, and that intensity is greatest, as you can see, in West Texas. Interestingly, the transmission system in West Texas is currently being significantly upgraded to move the wind power that's out there from that region to the load centers in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, San Antonio areas. Those upgrades will benefit the solar development in West Texas as well, because this area is the same. So let's talk about this potential. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory recently released a study that evaluates solar PV energy production potential on a state-by-state basis. And recall earlier that I asked you to keep the 68 gigawatt peak load number and the 73 gigawatt generation capacity numbers in mind. Well, the NREL study shows, on this map you can see it, a 154 gigawatt solar PV potential for Texas urban areas, just the urban areas only. So that potential is over twice the current generating capacity in ERCOT. Pretty significant. And if you think that is amazing, if you look at the rural areas in Texas, a great deal of Texas is rural, the NREL study shows a potential for a whopping 20,000 gigawatts of solar PV in Texas, almost 300 times the current capacity, sort of the Saudi Arabia, if you will, of solar power here in ERCOT. And both the urban and solar and rural solar PV potentials are the highest in Texas of any state. So it appears that there's a significant advantage of being large and having lots of sunshine, at least as far as solar PV is concerned. And then finally, the NREL estimates that there is a potential for as much as 60 gigawatts or just under the peak demand in ERCOT on Texas rooftops. Now, Texas here is second only to California in this category, simply because California has more rooftops. So if you add all this up, remember the ERCOT maximum load is 68 gigawatts, the generation capacity is 73, and you add all these up, the urban PV, the rural PV, the rooftop PV, all these potentials, and you can see that it is a huge number, but achieving just 1% of this capability would produce over 200 gigawatts, or almost 3 times the current ERCOT maximum load, just 1%. Now, one other issue, solar PV produces power at just the right time relative to load. You can see from this chart the relationship between solar power production, the peak load of the system, and the production of wind generation, primarily in this case in West Texas. The top line is, and look at the left axis. The top line is a typical peak load hot summer day, And you can see the peak is in the afternoon, usually about 5 o'clock. The orange line is the estimated solar production. This assumes 5 gigawatts, just 5 gigawatts or 5,000 megawatts of solar PV capacity, which is just 1/4 of 1% of the potential. Just 1/4 of 1% of the potential PV is included here. The blue line is the generation profile for a similar amount of wind power. Now remember, wind is actually about twice the 5,000 megawatts, but I used this just for an illustrative example to compare the two. So solar PV clearly produces the most power when it's needed the most, and obviously wind has a difficult time doing that. Again, the wind on the Texas coast is a little bit more consistent, so it would show up to be a little bit better than this. And as temperatures increase, air conditioning load increases, and by the way, solar PV increases as well. So it's a very synergistic situation with solar PV. Now, one other issue, capacity value is the portion of the capacity that can be counted on for reliability purposes. One of the things that ERCOT is responsible for, in fact, the most important thing that ERCOT is responsible for, is ensuring reliability of electric power. And in the case of wind, ERCOT assigns an 8.7% reliability factor due to the uncontrollability and the intermittency of wind. So what that means is if you build 1,000 megawatts of wind power, only 8.7% of that, or 87 megawatts, is counted toward that capacity to determine what the reserve margin would be. So there's a lot of wind that is not counted as being reliable. Now, the NREL study shows that wind is typically assigned a capacity value of somewhere between 5% and 40%, whereas solar PV is assigned a capacity value of 25% to 75% because it is synergistic with load. It does have the same uncontrollability aspect that wind has, but it is synergistic with load. And so the NREL, at least, suggests that a capacity value for reliability for solar is up to about 8.5 times the reliability factor for wind. Again, emphasizing that solar is a obvious choice. And then finally, the Brattle Group, although they did the report for the Public Utility Commission on Resource Adequacy, they also did a report for the Solar Energy Industries Association to estimate the cost savings and emission savings from the addition of solar PV in Texas. And if you look at the left-hand column under 5,000 megawatts, that's the number that was used in the previous chart that showed the comparison between the peak load between solar generation and wind generation. For 5,000 megawatts, we would save over 1.5 million tons of CO2, and it would produce an energy cost benefit in Texas of up to $520 million. So not only does solar produce power when you need it, it also saves money when you need to save money, and certainly saves a lot in the form of emissions. So a small 0.25% utilization of Texas solar PV potential would produce $1.5 billion of economic benefit and avoid the emission of over 1.5 million tons of CO2. So that brings me to the end. We need new capacity in ERCOT, clearly. We're growing at the rate of 2% a year. Currently, we have about 10,600 or so megawatts of wind that's operating, but we only have 75 megawatts of utility-scale solar PV operating. There's somewhere between 60 megawatts and 480 megawatts somewhere in the pipeline. So we're going to have more, but still it's minuscule compared to the amount of wind that we have, and yet it is much more valuable than the wind. We lead the nation in solar PV capability, both urban and rural. We sort of lag California on the rooftops, but maybe we can catch up with them as well. Solar PV has a higher capacity value than wind. It's synergistic with load, and while it will not displace wind or conventional generation completely, my question is, shouldn't it be a significant part of the energy equation for Texas and for the nation, for that matter? So that's what I have to say. That's a summary, if you will, of the issues surrounding the Texas capacity issue and what could be done about it, and I'd be glad to take your questions.
Okay, great, Ron. Thank you very much. And if you can go ahead as attendees and chat in the lower right corner, send to all panelists with your questions. I'll read those out. And first of all, Ron, this one was fairly long, so I chatted it to you. If you can look at it, it was from Richard. Have you reviewed the recent PUC filing 40740 to amend Section 25 to increase the renewable portfolio standard for non-wind resources to 3,000 megawatts by 2025 and to ensure effective implementation of the standard? And would you support this expansion of the non-wind RPS?
Well, I haven't read that particular section, but I think that anything that we can do to encourage solar is important. Increasing the RPS for other forms other than wind, a non-wind resource, to 3,000 megawatts seems to me, by 2025, seems to me to be shooting well below the target. As I showed you, we've got 200,000 gigawatts, not megawatts. This 200,000 gigawatts or megawatts of, gigawatts of solar potential in this state. So why would we limit it to 3,000 megawatts? And by the way, that 3,000 megawatts includes biomass and other forms, not just solar. So it seems to me that this shoots
And Ron, it seemed to have lost your voice there on that last one. Can you hear me? And while Ron reconnects, just a second, if you would continue again to send your questions in through the chat and chat to all panelists. And just a moment while Ron dials in again, and we will have his questions in a minute. And Ron, I still can't hear you, or maybe I can read the questions out. Okay, Ron's dialing in again. And he'll join in a moment. We have several other questions coming in, so please keep those coming in the queue from Kaiba and Sam and Matt. And as soon as Ron rejoins us, we will pick those up again. And as we're waiting for Ron, I will chat those questions to him so that he has the ability to see them as well. And again, if you have questions, you can chat those in the lower right corner. And Ron, are you able to hear us?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay,
Sorry,
we have you again. So the next question was from Kaiba. My name is Kaiba White. I work for the Public Citizen, part of the coalition that filed the petition at the PUC, and we certainly don't hope to limit solar development to 3,000 megawatts, but that number was given as a goal to get Texas started in the right direction. So she just wanted to make that comment. Another question for you was from Matt. What were the regulatory and payment terms under which the mothballed units were reintroduced into the market? And I presume it would represent worst-case pricing for any new capacity.
No, not exactly. The way that the mothballed units were brought back into service was that they were paid some sort of, I'm not sure of the exact number, but some sort of a capacity charge that just reflected an option premium for them to be available, and they were given additional funds to bring these units back into service. In other words, they were given some additional monies to refurbish or whatever they needed to do, and obviously ERCOT chose the units that were cheapest to bring back into service. Now, so they were paid a capacity charge, and again, I don't think that this capacity charge was tied in any way to the cost of new capacity. It simply was that which would be basically a PJM capacity market lookalike. It was tied mainly to to just a reasonable charge to have these units available, to pay some of the costs associated with having these units just sitting there not running. Now, if the units would run, they would get paid as much as $4,500 a megawatt hour, but
And Ron, we have lost audio from you again, and we're actually approaching the end of the hour. If you wanted to just chat the answer to the question to me, then I could read it out to a couple of other people. There were a few more questions that came in. One is from Matt. It was, what are the 3 simplest changes that we could make to the current market rules to improve solar deployment? And just kind of wondering if there's just 3 things that you would recommend doing to change the market rules. How would that improve solar deployment? And if you wanted to chat those, you can send to all participants, and they can see those answers. And I'll just read out some other questions while Ron is asking that. What do you think the barriers are that need to be overcome to further tap the untapped resource of the sun in Texas? So we will queue these up. And from Gianluca, we have, I'm an installer, and the big problem to develop a solar system is still the cost. With no incentive, it's difficult, so do you see a state incentive coming in the future? So, Ron, I've just been queuing up a few questions.
Okay, I apologize. I don't know what's going on here, but we're going to get these answered. Okay.
The phone company is not as reliable as the electricity company.
That's
so the
right.
question from Matt was, what are the 3 simplest changes that we might make to the current market rules to improve solar deployment?
Ooh, that's interesting.
Oh, and I apologize. I've lost Ron again. Well, since we're at the end of the half hour, what I'm going to do is we'll go ahead and end the session now, and I'm going to stay on the line with Ron and get these answers recorded. We will post all of the Q&A along with this recording. It'll be available at principalsolerinstitute.org. And again, you'll receive an email tomorrow that has that. To learn more about this topic, I encourage you to visit principalsolerinstitute.org, click on white papers. You'll see Ron's white paper on this topic. And you can also reach out to Ron as the author through his email link that's on the webinar page. And we apologize for those difficulties we had the answer, but I will stay online and we'll give the answers out in the recorded webinar. With that, we will close the session. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
Ron. So I went ahead and ended the session, but it looks like some of the attendees stayed on. So I just wanted to go ahead and try to get through as many of these questions as we can. So you were talking about the 3 simplest changes we could make to the current market rules.
Yeah, I apologize for this. I don't know if it's my phones or what's going on here, but anyway, in any event, well, you know, I think that solar speaks for itself. I don't know that we need any particular market rules to improve the penetration of solar. I think it's just a matter of solar moving into this space and people realizing that there is an advantage to solar. Now, I guess what the regulators could do would be to create a solar PV RPS, and that is a renewable portfolio standard, and require that solar be developed. But it seems to me that due to the drop in price in solar power, especially solar PV, that it seems to me that solar can stand on its own, or if it can't today quite, it will very, very shortly, as prices are dropping for panels as much as 40% a year. So I'm not sure that there's any regulatory interference that needs to be, or regulatory measures that need to be taken. I think that the solar industry speaks for itself, that the capability of solar and its price, as prices come down dramatically, will move into this space without any sort of regulatory interference.
And there's a follow-up question from Sam. Is, have you calculated what the installed cost of PV per watt that can be justified today without any changes to the program to be competitive with other resources like gas, nuclear, and others?
Well, I mean, the price for a solar facility it varies, but let's say panels are somewhere on the order of, we're less than $1 a watt, which is less than $1,000 a kW, which is the way typically these plants are priced. So let's compare that with a gas plant. A combined cycle gas plant today would cost about $1,100 a kW. A coal plant would cost upwards of $2,000, probably more like $2,400 or $2,500 a kW, and a nuclear plant's probably somewhere in the order of $5,000 to $7,000 a kW. Now, so the solar panels are less than $1,000, maybe down into the $600 to $700 a kilowatt range, and then you'd have the installation cost, which would at least double that. So maybe we're talking about solar today, solar PV installations today, somewhere in the, and this is just an estimate, $2,000 to $3,000 a kW range, which is very competitive, certainly much cheaper than nuclear, very competitive with coal, a little bit, somewhat more expensive than combined cycle power. But remember, this is that's not a life cycle cost. The life cycle cost for all of those technologies is considerably higher because they burn a lot of fuel. And you know, solar PV does burn a lot of fuel. It comes from our friend the sun, but there's no cost to it. And so that really tips the balance in favor of solar. So if you look at the life cycle cost, I haven't done that calculation, but I'm confident that they're very competitive, even with combined cycle natural gas, which is about the cheapest reasonable resource, in fact, about the only resource that's being built today.
And a follow-up question from Gianluca is, do you see a state incentive coming in the future? I'm an installer, and the big problem for me still is developing a solar system it remains cost without incentive in Texas. So do you see any state incentive coming with the upcoming legislative session next year?
Well, I don't. That may or may not be.
And Ron, we lost your audio one more time. I apologize for those that have stayed on, but again, this will be recorded and the questions will be posted with Q&A, so if you need to drop off, you're welcome to go ahead and drop off. And email will be sent to everyone, and the link will be posted at principalsolarinstitute.org/events. Also, Ron's white paper is available at principalsolarinstitute.org/documents. Or just go to the home page and then click on white paper. And we also encourage you to look at our upcoming events calendar at principalsolarinstitute.org. Next week we'll be hosting a webinar with the behind-the-scenes look at the development of a 2-megawatt solar farm, a smart solar array in Sharon, Vermont. We'll be looking with the suppliers at that solar farm. And so,
here I am.
Ron,
sorry about that again.
That's all right. So we were talking about if you see a state incentive coming up in the legislature next year.
Well, I do not. The PUC, now, while the PUC does not dictate what the legislature does, the PUC hasn't exhibited a whole lot of interest in solar at this point, unfortunately. And that, to some extent, translates to the legislature. The legislature last time, in 2011, considered a solar renewable portfolio standard, but did not adopt it. So I sort of doubt that will happen. And again, as I said earlier, I'm not sure that's needed. I think while it may take a little while, a year, 2 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. Solar is the economics of solar suggest, and the fact that Texas has got so much potential suggests that it's going to come about on its own. And I think that's the healthiest way for solar to be a participant. I don't look for a situation where the only reason that solar power exists is because of incentives, because of government payments. I think that is artificial and doesn't last. So, but solar is headed in the direction of certainly not needing any sort of thing like that. But the bottom line is I don't think while there may be a bill introduced, I don't think the legislature will pass a bill that provides a renewable portfolio standard or a requirement to build solar.
Okay. Another question was, have you heard of the regulatory assistant projects ideas about a modified capacity market for Texas? And that was there was no follow-up to that, so I'm not sure.
Well,
have you heard of that?
You know, there have been I wouldn't say hundreds, but close to proposals about a capacity market in Texas, or how to construct one, or some modification thereof. Basically, it boils, and I have not, frankly, to be honest, I have not read that particular particular proposal. But what it boils down to is what I showed earlier, something between a full-blown capacity market, which I think is doubtful in the near term, and rocking along like we are today with an energy-only market. I think what we'll see is changes in the small changes in the way the market operates, and a continued study on the part of ERCOT and really on the part of the PUC, while we wait to see if new generation isn't developed within the current framework. If that's the case, I think most would prefer to stay with what we have, except for the generators. Now, there are some generators that would prefer a capacity market because it scratches their itch. It pays them to build new capacity. It eliminates a lot of their risk. But the retailers, the retail electric providers, and in a sense, the customers are going to have to pay for all this. So that's really the question. That's really the issue. Do we go with what the generators want to do and create a capacity market that guarantees some payment and provides incentive, provides some risk reduction, and put that cost on the ratepayer, or on the electric provider or electric user, which is the only place the cost can go? Or do we stick with a capacity market and allow it to operate as it should? Now, there are, again, all sorts of shades in between, and each one of those options that are out there scratch a certain itch of the party that has put them forward. So, again, there are many, many options and many, many nuances of these options, and it's going to take a while to shake all that out. But I don't think we'll go to a full capacity market anytime soon, if ever. I believe that the market we will go to will be not be called a capacity market. We'll have components of a capacity market. But right now, I think it's politically unattractive to put all those costs, the cost of a full-blown capacity market, onto the retail electric providers and therefore onto the customers.
Excellent. We had a question. It was a follow-up. Said you gave us the prices per kilowatt to build gas, coal, and nuclear, but how long does it take to build those plants, and how could the reserve be met in 1 or 2 years if they haven't been started yet?
Yeah, well, just give you an idea. To build a combined cycle plant takes about 2 years. That's assuming you've got your air permit and an interconnection permit, which takes some additional time, maybe 6 months to get. The state is very friendly with regard to air permits and interconnection permits, so it would not take too long to get those. But let's say from inception to completion for a combined cycle plant, 2.5 years roughly. For a coal plant, probably more like 4 years of construction, certainly 3.5 years anyway, and another couple of years to get a permit, an air permit, which you would be unable to get today. So it's sort of a moot point for the coal plants because you just couldn't get the air permit to build them today. A nuclear plant, much, much longer. A nuclear plant, probably 6 to 8 years all in. It takes 3 years just to get the license, and then another 5, 6 years to build it. So it's a long, long process. Now, you can build simple cycle combustion turbines. These are not combined cycle. Simple cycle, which means it's just basically a big gas engine or a big jet engine. Those can be built in, I'd say, including the air permit, probably within a year. So we do have the opportunity. There is time to deal with these resource adequacy issues. Now, an important thing to watch is the projections that come out in December in the next report that show what the reserve margins are. Remember, these are estimates. These are projections, and the reserve margin projections are based upon two things. One is how much is the load going to grow, and how much generation is going to be available to serve that load. We talked about the wind value, capacity value at 8.7%. It could easily be assigned a capacity value of 13, 14, 15%, much higher than that, which would effectively add more capacity to the system, raising the reserve margin. So I don't look for these reserve margin projections that you saw on this graph, which are the current ones. I don't look for those to continue. I think they'll be better in the next report.
Okay, and there was a question related to that. It said that the payments were capped at $500 a megawatt hour, and you said that was recently relaxed. The question was, what are the regulatory? Oh, sorry, it was. I got that one crossed over. The question was, what would the market price rise to if these caps were removed in today's market?
Well, that's a good question. Again, we really don't know exactly what they would rise to because we haven't allowed them to do so. Early on, again in 2001, with a reasonably hot summer, certainly not a record summer, the power prices rose for very short periods of time, 15-minute intervals, and maybe just a few of those, to as much as $10,000 a megawatt hour. Now, what that does is it provides incentive. If you have enough of those periods of time during the year, it provides incentive to build a simple cycle combustion turbine, which is relatively inexpensive to build, less than $1,000 a kW, to serve the load just during those periods of time, to just run short periods of time. It provides enough revenue during those short periods of time to justify the building of those units. However, the market has never been allowed to rise to those levels. Would it rise to $10,000 a megawatt hour today? I'm not sure that it would, but my suspicion is it would rise significantly higher than the $4,500 a megawatt hour that is currently the limit. And the PUC, by the way, is almost certain to raise that limit to as much as $9,000 a megawatt hour. The idea being, again, to provide enough periods of time with significant revenue or substantial revenue to incent the building of primarily of peaking generation. So that's an interesting question. You could probably do a study that would give you a number, and my guess is the number wouldn't be far from $10,000 a megawatt hour, but it would just be a guess, an estimate, a scientific guess, I guess, is about all it would be. Unless you let the market operate and see what those numbers would be, it's very difficult to say.
Well, I think your guesses are going to be better than most of the scientific studies that average people would do, so that's pretty good. We had one more question, and then we'll close things up. It was related to slide 14, the rural PV solar capacity. And it wondered if that number, does that exclude currently used farmland and unusable land like lakes and canyons, or does that PV capacity just calculate the square footage of all rural land regardless of its current use and assume that all of that land was converted to solar production?
Well, it does take into account some geographic nuances. I'm not sure it takes into account mountains and that sort of thing, but I do believe it takes into account lakes and cities, areas which clearly are not rural and where you couldn't build PV. But now let me if you look at that slide, it says it would take 425,000 square kilometers to produce that much, to produce 20,000 gigawatts. And the number at the end, 61%, that's 61% of the area of Texas. So, 39% of the area, of the land area of Texas is not included in that number. So, and I'd have to read the background to the NREL study, but I am confident that it doesn't include any areas that they could predict where you could not build PV, like lakes, like probably even highways, certainly cities. So it is legitimate from the standpoint of including as much or as little, or as much of the rural area as is practical as possible. So again, only 61% of the land area is included, so that eliminates 39%. And if you've been out to West Texas, you know that there's an awful lot of land out there, and it's hard to for me to visualize that just West Texas area isn't at least 60% of the land area of the state.
And I had said that was the last question, but there was one that came in looking at this map. The question was, why is ERCOT isolated from the East U.S. and the West U.S. grids? And looking at this map, would there be any potential of connecting New Mexico generation capacity to the Texas demand market?
Well, that is a very, very that is an interesting question with a very long answer, but I'll try to make it real short. It's a political and legal issue. Because the Texas system is not connected to the rest of the U.S.
Oh, and Ron, I lost you. I was really interested in hearing this answer. Let's see. Hang on. I'm going to try to mute and unmute you. Ron, can you hear me? We don't have Ron. Ron, if you wanted to just dial in one last time, we'll finish this up. And again, for those of you that were on the phone, you're welcome to leave at any time. We're going to transcribe these questions and answers since we had the audio problems during the discussion. And those will be posted at principalsolarinstitute.org, along with the recording of the audio and visuals and a PDF copy of these slides. And so you'll receive an email tomorrow, and you'll be able to just click on that link and see these questions and answers transcribed. So feel free to drop off at any point. If you want to remain, I'm going to stay on for just the answer to this question because I was dying to hear Ron's answer on that, and then we will end the event for everyone after that. And
okay, back on. All
right, Ron, this will be the last one, and then we'll close things up. So why is ERCOT isolated from East U.S. and West U.S., and could we bring any power generation from New Mexico?
Well, let me start with the first and answer the second later at the end here, just real quickly. We're isolated because if we were not isolated, we would be subject to Federal Energy Regulatory Commission jurisdiction, and we're not currently. So any connection at alternating current, AC current, across state boundaries would subject the state to FERC jurisdiction, which requires us to do some things from a reliability standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint that we don't have to do now. And Texas, as you know, is a fiercely independent state. So we are not connected for that reason. Now there's a long history behind that, and I won't go into that today, but a huge history, as a matter of fact, legal and regulatory history behind that. But nonetheless, that's why we're not connected today. Could we connect with New Mexico, which would be the Western Interconnect? That is from essentially anything from Texas west is called the Western Interconnect. We could, but there's not much generation capacity in New Mexico. It's a very low population state. There's not much generation there. In fact, they get a lot of their power from Arizona, from nuclear in Arizona, and from very, very north part of the state, they get some coal generation. The most logical thing for us to do would be to connect either east into Louisiana and Arkansas, where there is considerably more generating capacity, or into Oklahoma. And we are interconnected, or with Mexico for that matter, and we are interconnected with Mexico, with with Arkansas, with Louisiana, and well, with Arkansas, I'm sorry, not Louisiana, and with Oklahoma, but we're connected at direct current voltages. And to the legal definition, direct current does not subject us to FERC jurisdiction. There's a lot of there's technical reason for that. Electrons under DC don't flow across state borders, so therefore we're not subject to FERC jurisdiction. So there are some interconnections at direct current, but they're relatively small. The capacity of the system is about 73,000 megawatts, and we have somewhere on the order less than 2,000 megawatts of connection across state lines, and power flows across those DC interconnections every day. Are we going to connect at AC, alternating current? Probably not, because of the FERC jurisdiction issue, and because if you connected at alternating current, you would have to build something on the order of between 15 and 20 very large transmission interconnections, which would be extremely expensive to build. And finally, one last thing, ERCOT operates the system on a frequency basis. That is, they try to keep the frequency at 60 cycles all the time. The rest of the world, the Eastern Interconnect and the Western Interconnect, operate on a voltage basis, so they try to maintain voltage levels. So if we connected with them at alternating current, we'd have to change the way we control our system. Could we do that? Sure, but it would, again, the side issue or the major issue is the FERC jurisdiction. So I don't think you're going to see any major AC interconnection anytime soon. You probably will see some small DC interconnection additions to Mexico primarily, but they'll be relatively small, 100 megawatts or so.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for answering the questions, and thank you for your time. And we will end things now. So again, the webinar recording will be posted tomorrow at principalsolarinstitute.org under the webinars tab. And under the white papers tab, you can see Ron's actual white paper on this topic and download that, and you can communicate with the author. So with that, Ron, I'll thank you and thank our sponsor, Principal Solar, and we will close.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for all
you're welcome.
But I hope we got the questions answered adequately.
Yes, we did. Thank you very much, Ron.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.